Welcome to a place where hearts unwind, infinite threads that gently bind, love and compassion in every line. Together we rise through space and time.
Hey, welcome back to Infinite Threads. I'm your host, Bob. There's something many people quietly carry through life without fully realizing how heavy it is. And that something is resentment and old anger. The memory of things that felt unfair, things that hurt, moments where someone treated us in a way that stayed with us long after the moment itself passed. Most of us don't walk around thinking about these things all the time, but they settle into the background of our lives like a weight in a backpack that we've been wearing for so long we've almost forgotten it's there. And then something interesting happens when a person begins practicing love and compassion intentionally. Not just once in a while, but regularly, day after day, little by little, something inside begins to change. And one of the first things that starts to loosen its grip is hatred. Now, hatred is a strong word, and most people don't like applying it to themselves. But if we're honest, there are often people in our lives we've pushed into a mental category that feels very close to it. People we decided long ago were simply wrong. People who hurt us. People we stopped trying to understand. At some point we wrote them off in our minds and built a wall around the memory of them. And that wall can stay there for years, sometimes decades. But when you begin practicing compassion daily, something curious begins happening to the wall. It starts developing cracks. Not because the past suddenly changes, and not because the hurt disappears, but because your perspective slowly widens. You begin to see the person who hurt you, not only as the person who caused pain, but as a human being who is also moving through their own confusion, their own fear, their own unfinished struggles. And that realization doesn't excuse what happened. It simply adds a dimension that you may not have allowed yourself to see before. And once that dimension appears, holding on to pure anger becomes harder. Because anger thrives on a very simple picture of the world. Good people on one side, bad people on the other. But compassion introduces complexity. It reminds us that human beings are rarely that simple. And once you begin seeing that complexity, something remarkable happens, guys. The emotional grip of resentment begins to loosen. Now, I want to share something personal here. For over 300 episodes now, 5 days a week, this podcast has asked me to sit down and reflect on love, compassion, and the humanity that connects us. At first, I thought I was simply exploring these ideas, but something else was happening too. These reflections were slowly working on me. When you spend this much time thinking about compassion, when you spend this many mornings asking yourself how to understand people more deeply, something begins to soften inside you. You find yourself reacting differently to situations that once would have irritated you. You notice yourself pausing where once you would have snapped. You begin seeing the human story behind people's behavior more quickly than you used to. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, some of the old emotional weight that you've carried for years begins to fade. Not because you forced it to disappear, but because you simply stopped feeding it. Hatred requires energy to survive. Resentment requires attention. When your attention gradually shifts toward understanding and compassion, those old emotional fires begin to burn lower. And the feeling that replaces them is something, guys, it's something many people don't expect. It's a feeling of relief. It feels like setting down a heavy suitcase that you've been carrying through an airport for miles. You suddenly realize how much lighter you feel without it. Your thoughts become calmer. Your interactions with people feel less tense. The world itself begins to look less hostile, and you start to understand something important. Forgiveness, or at least the loosening of anger, is not something we offer primarily as a gift to the other person. It is something that we offer to ourselves. I know you've heard that before. Because the person who stops feeding resentment gains something far more valuable than the satisfaction of holding on to it. They gain peace. Not perfect peace. We're still human. But a quieter mind, a lighter heart, and a little more space inside themselves for the thing that started this entire journey. Love. That doesn't mean we forget the past. It doesn't mean we ignore injustice or abandon healthy boundaries. But it does mean that we stop allowing old anger to define the emotional landscape of our lives. And once that shift begins, you realize something that may be one of the most profound discoveries along this path. Love does change the world. But the first world it changes is the one inside of you. I love you guys very, very, very much. And you know what I need you to do. Go out and pass that on, okay? Later, Gators. Bye-bye.